Around the year 1162, in a harsh, unforgiving stretch of grassland in what is now Mongolia, a boy was born to a minor tribal chief named Yesugei. He named his son Temujin after a rival warrior his father had just defeated in battle. There were no palaces, no servants, no guarantees of survival. Temujin's world was one of constant warfare between dozens of competing Mongol, Tatar, and Turkic clans, all fighting over scarce grazing land, livestock, and water. When Temujin was just 9 years old, his father was poisoned by a rival Tatar clan during a meal, a common method of assassination on the steppe. With Yesugei dead, his clan abandoned the family. A widow and her children were considered worthless without a protector. Temujin's mother, Hoelun, was left to raise 5 children alone on the open plains, surviving on roots, wild onions, and whatever small game the children could catch. It was during this period of desperate poverty that Temujin committed his first act of violence. His older half-brother, Begta, had begun bullying the family and taking food from the younger children. Temujin and his full brother ambushed and killed him. He was around 14 years old. His mother was horrified, but the message was clear. In Temujin's world, survival came before sentiment. Temujin's early life reads like a survival thriller. He was captured by a rival clan, the Taichiud, and enslaved, forced to wear a wooden collar called a kangwe that prevented him from feeding himself or defending himself. He escaped by attacking a guard during a night raid and hiding in a river, breathing through a hollow reed. He returned to his family, now a teenager, hardened by loss and hardship. He married a girl named Borte, to whom he had been betrothed as a child. Shortly after, Borte was kidnapped by a rival tribe, the Merkits, a devastating blow that Temujin would spend years plotting to avenge. To rescue his wife, Temujin turned to 2 powerful allies, Togrul, Khan of the Karite tribe, and a former ally of his late father, and Jamukha, a childhood blood brother. Together, they raided the Merkits and recovered Borte. This victory did something crucial. It proved Temujin could lead. Warriors began joining him not out of tribal obligation, but by choice. This was radical. On the steppe, loyalty was almost always tied to bloodline and clan. Temujin was building something different, a following based on personal loyalty and shared reward. Over the next 2 decades, Temujin systematically defeated every rival power on the Mongolian steppe: the Tatars, the Merkits, the Naimans, and eventually his own former friend and blood brother, Jamukha, who became his fiercest rival. What set Temujin apart wasn't just battlefield skill, it was how he restructured Mongol society itself. He abolished the old aristocratic system where leadership was inherited by bloodline. Instead, he promoted men based on merit and loyalty. A blacksmith's son could become a general if he proved himself in battle. He organized his army into units of 10, a decimal system that made his forces far more disciplined and coordinated than any rival force. He also imposed a strict code of law called the Yasa, which banned the traditional practice of kidnapping women, regulated the slave trade among Mongols, and demanded absolute loyalty, punishable by death for desertion in battle. In 1206, at a great assembly called a Kurultai, the tribal leaders of the steppe united behind him and gave him a new title, Genghis Khan, often translated as universal ruler or oceanic ruler. For the first time in history, the fractured tribes of Mongolia were one nation. and that nation was about to turn outward. With Mongolia unified, Genghis Khan turned its attention to its neighbors. His army, though smaller than those of the settled empires he faced, had advantages no one else could match: speed, discipline, and psychological warfare. Mongol horsemen could ride up to 100 miles a day, switching between multiple horses to keep them fresh. They were skilled enough to fire arrows accurately at a full gallop, and they used terror strategically. Cities that surrendered were often spared, while cities that resisted were made into brutal examples for others to see. His first major campaigns targeted the Western Xia and Jin dynasties in northern China, forcing them into submission through a combination of siege warfare and diplomacy. Then, in 1219, came the campaign that defined his reputation for the rest of history: the invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire, a vast Islamic empire covering modern-day Iran, Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan. The war began after the Khwarezmian governor of a border city executed a caravan of Mongol traders and diplomats, and the empire's Shah refused to apologize or hand over the culprit. Genghis Khan took this as an unforgivable insult. What followed was one of the most devastating military campaigns in human history. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench, some of the wealthiest and most advanced cities on earth at the time, were besieged, captured, and in several cases, virtually annihilated. Historians estimate the population of the region dropped by millions in just a few years through direct killing, famine, and the destruction of irrigation systems that had sustained agriculture for centuries. It's this campaign, more than any other, that cemented Genghis Khan's reputation as one of history's most feared conquerors. But Genghis Khan wasn't just a destroyer. Within the empire he built, he established something the medieval world rarely saw: religious tolerance. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and shamanists were all permitted to practice freely as long as they remained loyal subjects. He also protected and revived trade along the Silk Road, creating a level of safety for merchants and travelers that allowed goods, ideas, and information to move across Asia faster than ever before. A period later, historians would call the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace. He established one of the first long-distance messenger relay systems in history, the YAM, allowing information to travel across his empire at record speed. Contradictory as it seems, the same man responsible for the deaths of an estimated 40 million people also created conditions of stability, tolerance, and connectivity that helped shape the medieval world. In 1227, while leading a campaign against the Western Xia, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause is still debated by historians. Theories range from injuries sustained falling from a horse to illness to assassination. What is certain is what happened next. His followers wanted no one to ever find his grave. According to legend, the funeral procession killed everyone they encountered along the way to keep the burial location secret. The slaves who dug his grave were killed by the soldiers who buried them. Those soldiers were then killed by other soldiers. Horses were reportedly driven over the burial site to erase all trace of it, and a river may have even been diverted over the location. To this day, despite decades of searching, the tomb of Genghis Khan has never been found. After his death, his empire continued to expand under his sons and grandsons, including his grandson Kublai Khan, who would go on to conquer all of China and found the Yuan dynasty. At its peak, the Mongol Empire stretched from Korea to Eastern Europe, encompassing roughly 12 million square miles, nearly a quarter of the Earth's inhabited land. A controversial 2003 genetic study suggested that roughly 1 in 200 men alive today, around 16 million people, carry a Y chromosome lineage traceable to a single source in Mongolia around the time of Genghis Khan, though the exact link to him personally remains debated among geneticists. In Mongolia today, he isn't remembered as a monster, he's a national hero, the founder of the Mongolian nation, honored with statues, currency, and even the country's main airport bearing his name. Was he one of history's greatest destroyers or one of its greatest state builders? The honest answer is both. And that contradiction is exactly why, 8 centuries later, we're still talking about him. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's most feared conqueror, subscribe for more untold stories of the figures who shaped our world. And let me know in the comments who you want covered next.